You're listening to the groundbreaking podcast from the Global Ag Tech Initiative. The Global Ag Tech Initiative is the catalyst for connecting, engaging, and fostering dialogue in global food production with technology as the foundation for driving innovation and solutions. The groundbreaking podcast brings forth voices across the industry to discuss trends, best practices, and innovative ideas driving agriculture forward in a rapidly changing world. Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's episode of Groundbreaking Podcast. I'm Heather Tunstall, co-chair of Global Ag Tech Initiative, and today I'm here with Jacob Parnell, Director of Agronomy at Biome Makers. Welcome, Jacob.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We're thrilled to have you. And we wanted to talk a little bit today about soil health, but first I'd like to get to know you a little bit better. Would you like to share a little bit about your background and also Biome Makers?
Sure. I got a PhD from Michigan State University in microbial ecology, specifically in the soil sciences group. And from there, I've kind of stayed within the soils and microbiome area. So I did a postdoc and then moved on to a research faculty position at Utah State University. After that, I joined the National Ecological Observatory Network in Colorado, designing kind of the, how are we going to measure microbes, soil microbes as kind of the ecosystems evolve and change due to climate change and different land use patterns. And after that, I jumped over into industry. I was with a company called Novozymes. They've since changed their name to Novanesis. I was with them for about 8 years before joining Biome Makers. And I was with Biome Makers for about a year and a half before I decided to take my family and move to Rome for a year to join the Global Soil Partnership as a soil biodiversity specialist, working on a global soil biodiversity observatory.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Actually, I'm here now, so that ended just recently. But now I'm joining back with Biome Makers. So a little bit of kind of what Biome Makers does is biology in soils has always been very complicated, very difficult to grasp, and because of that, it hasn't really been cracked. So it's been really hard to really find out what's going on in the ecosystem, especially for farmers. I mean, research universities that are able to afford putting hundreds of thousands into field trials and to research have been able to answer a lot of these questions and develop a lot of tools. Those tools have never made it down to a farm level. And so that's really the goal of Biome Makers, is to make it so that the biology of the soil is available to every farmer so that they can see what is going on in their soils. Basically, a farmer will go out and they'll collect a soil sample, just like they do with a nutrient analysis. They'll send a sample and we'll basically sequence the DNA. And rather than sending them a whole bunch of information that is really hard to understand, we try to synthesize and, I guess, digest that into an easy to read, easy to understand format that can basically say, these are the pathways that are lower in your farm than we would expect to see. And so that's kind of a biological interpretation of what they can see in their farm. And as a result, they're able to say, oh, well, so I might need to work on enhancing these pathways or this type of biology in my management practices.
Right.
And so we're really trying to give them the access to this. And I think we'll get into more of the soil health and soil biology here in a little bit, but I just kind of wanted to leave a high level introduction of what we do at Biome Makers.
Absolutely. And yeah, we'll focus quite a bit on that soil health management and what that means. And it sounds like Biome Makers is that consultant, so to speak, but also you're taking that data and you're actually giving practical takeaways and actionable insight into what farmers should be doing with it, right? And how to have a better, more successful land usage.
Yeah, exactly. And another thing that we're able to do is we kind of are almost like a mediator between, so there are a lot of biologicals companies that are out there that are putting forward the next best thing, the all natural, organic biofertilizer that is sure to do wonders for your crop. But then the question is, how do you test that, and how do you know if that's what you need?
Right.
And so on one hand, we work with a lot of those companies that then are able to do their field trials and look at how their product impacts the biology and those nutrient cycling and the biology of the microbiome.
Hmm.
And then on the other hand, we're able to say, okay, so we know that this product impacts these cycles, so that when a farm comes up and says, we have a deficiency in these cycles, then we're able to kind of maybe put those two together and say, well, here's some types of products that you could potentially use, biological products that might make a difference in your field.
Great. Okay. So let's dig a little bit deeper into that soil health management side of things. And the focus on soil health within the industry is not new, right? The conversation's been around even since before the Dust Bowl days and the modern approach to farming with soil health in mind. Let's take a step back and talk about why. So, why is it important for growers, for farmers to prioritize soil health?
Oh, that's a great question. For one, the priority of soil health is all about sustainability. We know that the UN back in 2015 put out a report that said 1/3 of all of the world's soils are degraded.
Hmm.
Now, mind you, that's mostly looking at physical and chemical properties of the soil because we don't really have that insight into the biology to look as widely as we do. Now, Europe just put out a statement saying that 60% of their soils are degraded.
Oh, wow.
And so we know that the course that we're on right now, and that same report that said that 1/3 of the soils were degraded is saying that by the year 2050, 90% of the soils will be degraded. So we
Hmm.
know that we're losing soil quality by our current methods of agriculture. A lot of that's conventional agriculture. A lot of that's just kind of the way that things have been done in the past. And so there's this idea that we need to change and we need to focus on soil health, and it has become a big topic because these numbers are and I hate being an alarmist, but they are rather alarming, especially when we think that 90% of the soil is degraded in 2050, and yet we have to feed 2 billion more people that are expected to be on the planet at that time. There's not a whole lot more we can squeeze out of our agricultural land, especially if they're degraded. And
Yeah.
so one solution is to focus on the health of the soils, to see if we can continue to have highly productive soils without them becoming more degraded.
Yeah. And with in light of these reports coming out, but also in just basic increase in yield and understanding a little bit more about healthy plants, there's been a lot of significant increase in scientific research, right? And attempts at developing systems and processes that work toward fostering a more healthy, biodiverse soil ecosystem and reducing erosion, degradation, and unhealthy scenarios. Where are we today when it comes to the technologies that help achieve these goals?
So I think we're actually pretty far. I think we
Okay.
know what we need to do, but it's just really hard to take that. It's almost like a leap of faith,
Hmm.
because one of the problems is that as you transition into kind of away from highly mechanized synthetic fertilizer, conventional agriculture into more of a biodynamic or a regenerative agriculture, there's a little bit of a lag. It takes a little while for the ecosystem to kind of rebalance and to restore itself of about, I don't know, anywhere from about 3 to 5 years. And so for those 3 to 5 years, you're not going to see huge, you know, bumps in crops, but you are building a healthier soil that, of course, in the long run is going to be good, but in the short term, in the pocketbook, it's really hard. And I mean, as much as anyone that right now farmers are the margin on farmers is not that great. And so to say you're going to take a loss for a couple of years is not a very happy prospect for them. Um,
Yeah.
so we have the tools, we have in a lot of cases we know what to do. It's just hard to do that. And so a lot of times it needs to be little steps that are taken in order to kind of to turn that big ship around.
And, as you mentioned, investment is always a top consideration for growing operations and farms. So let's talk a little bit about that and how technologies that focus on soil health provide that ROI. What's that timeline look like and why make that investment?
And that's a really great question, and that's a very big concern on a lot of farmers.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I can only go to kind of the historical, I guess maybe anecdotal of farmers that have kind of made that leap of faith,
Mm-hmm.
that have started to say, I'm going to implement some more regenerative practices. I'm going to, reduce or no-till agriculture. I'm going to, start using manures and biologicals to help my crops. And one of the things that they see is not only, I mean, they see that dip, but then it recovers. And then they also see that the soils are much healthier and that their
Mm-hmm.
plants, therefore, are much healthier. So they don't need to spray pesticides as often. They don't need to fertilize quite as much. And then also that in times of stress, drought or things like that, their plants, their fields are much more resilient to those kind of stresses because of that healthy soil system. As far as numbers, I'm not sure what the ROI is, but at least the farmers that I've talked to that say that they're out in their field and their field looks fine and everybody else's field around them is dying. I mean, to me, that's pretty impressive.
So let's talk a little bit about the data aspect of this, right? And collecting biological data on soil. What can growers do with that data? How does that help them increase the soil health and ultimately help their business?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's one of the things that we've kind of discovered is that a lot of times when we do, for example, in the past, a farmer would go out, they would collect a soil sample, send it off for kind of nutrient analysis. They would figure out how much nitrogen was in their soil, and then they'd be able to calculate how much nitrogen fertilizer they need to apply. And we're finding that that's not always the best way to go about doing that because a lot of times you've got microbes in the soil. So there's already plenty of say potassium, for example. There's plenty of potassium in your soil. It's just locked up in an unavailable form for the plants to use. And so instead of adding potassium to the soil, we recommend things like we'll add some organisms that are good at solubilizing potassium. And we found that they've been able to do that, and they've been able to find out which pathways they're able to remediate, I guess, which pathways they're able to help out with biological solutions. Sometimes it's composting solutions where they're
Okay.
able to look at basically what are the pathways that are low in your system and how can you increase those biological pathways? How can you get the biology working for you?
Okay, great. And a lot of growers and farmers, they are absolute experts in their farm and understanding what needs to be done, but not all of them are scientists, right? And understand the biology of the soil to the extent that perhaps an agronomist might. So, what advice do you have for some of these growing operations who know they may need to remedy their soil health, but they're not sure where to start?
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said earlier, the first step of a farmer was to go out into his field to take a soil sample and send it off for nutrient analysis. And that was obviously the smart thing to do. You don't just say, well, last year I put on X number of nitrogen, so I'm going to do the same thing this year. And so I think the first step is to just figure out what the biology is like. Now you can do that with something like Biomakers, but you can also just go out and you can look and see, how many earthworms do I have in my soil? Do I have a lot of earthworms? Do I not see any? If you don't see any, that could potentially be a problem. And then look at some of the other different types of biodiversity, some of these indicators of whether your soil is really alive or whether it's basically just kind of a sterile place for your plants to grow and you're just kind of feeding nutrients to the plant rather than to the soil.
And in your experience, do you have any examples of operations within the industry have successfully utilized soil health technology?
Within the industry and within the world as well. So um, there's I was recently at a meeting where there was a delegation from Thailand that came. It was a lady that was talking about how her parents had grown up on this farm and basically the soil had become so degraded over time that it was no longer usable. And she said that she learned about some of these regenerative practices and she went back to the farm and she started applying those. And she said that slowly but surely it came back. And so, here she was, and, tears coming down her face, that she said, I can grow rice again. And she said, I brought some treats for everybody. This is the rice that was made on my farm that used to not be able to grow rice, but now we
Oh,
can grow
amazing.
rice again.
Yeah,
And I think that's really those are the people that we really need to impact, or the farmers. So yes, there are a lot of industry stories that I could share, but I think that's one that was touching for me.
absolutely. I mean, this is livelihood for so many people, but I mean, not only is it livelihood for the farmers themselves, but then the end consumer as well, looking for healthy plants to eat, looking for something that they can trust, right? As a consumer. So, the ripple effects are enormous, and it's wonderful to see that.
Yeah.
So we look at sort of the biology, and we look at the technology as a part of a whole ag tech initiative, right? And the proper usage of technologies for better outcomes. So what I wanted to do next was kind of give you the opportunity to share your foresight with us. And what do you see in the next 3 to 5 years in terms of how precision agriculture and biology, soil health all work together? What are you seeing in the next short term, 3 to 5 years or so?
One of the things that I did with the FAO, with the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, was to help to set up a global soil biodiversity observatory. And so basically, I guess what I'm trying to say is it's not just the ag tech industry. It's
Hmm.
global. It's in 2022, all of the governments that were members of the Conference of the Parties at the Convention on Biological Diversity signed, saying we need to conserve and sustainably use soil biodiversity. And so they basically are saying we are committed to this. And so we'll see how it goes. There are initiatives everywhere, and I think that ag tech has a huge role to play in this, because ag tech plays that link between what can be done and what is done. A lot of times, academic research is what can be done, but not necessarily as affordable or practical, or can be taken down to the field scale. And so there's kind of been a big disconnect between that. And so industry has always been the ones that are facing the farmers. They're the ones that are out there working with them. And as bad as some of these fertilizer companies have it right now, is in the media, they're the ones that have been there by the side of the farmers to try to get them better yields, to get them the profits. And so there is a role to play for them, and that relationship between the farmers. We just need to kind of help shift that. And remote sensing is going to play a big part in this, because one of the things that we know about biology, it's quite different than the chemistry and the physical properties of the soil. So those are the three central components of soil health are the physical, chemical, and biological.
Okay.
And we've been measuring the physical and the chemical for decades, if not centuries, but the biological has always been the one that's missing. But now we've got that piece there. We're starting to hopefully learn how to look at that a little bit better. We've got soil maps that talk about the different physical properties of soils and divide them into classes, and you can have these soil maps across the world. We've got chemical maps where you can actually look at, kind of use remote sensing to even be able to tell what stresses your plants are undergoing through kind of this hyperspectral imaging. And we're getting close to being able to do the same with biology, at least to be able to say these areas are different biologically, and maybe we can go over and see why, and start to map those out.
Hmm.
And so that's a place where hopefully this global biodiversity observatory and the industry can overlap a little bit, and coordinate to be able to come together.
Wonderful. And, I appreciate all of that, because that's a big part of what we try to do with the Global Ag Tech Initiative, is that open conversation and collaboration across all aspects of agriculture, right? From the academic to the government to the industry to the farmer to tech enablers, suppliers, everybody. Because that's what it takes. It takes everybody kind of rowing in the same direction, right? For ultimate success. So certainly appreciate that. Jacob, is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience today?
I think I just want to point out that plants evolved in a microbial world. So bacteria were there long before plants, and they're going to be there long after
Mhm.
we're all gone. And so they play such a crucial role to plant health, planetary health, to our health directly. There was a recent publication by the National Academy of Sciences that came out showing the linkages between soil health and human health. And so it's not just about better health for the plants and better crops. It directly impacts us in a lot of different ways. Just don't treat soil like dirt, I guess.
Wonderful. Jacob, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. And where can people find more information about Biome Makers?
They can just go to our website, www.biomakers.com, and they can find all of the information there. We've got a lot of publications, we've got a lot of testimonials from farmers. So we've kind of got the gamut of people that we've worked with and some of our success stories.
Wonderful. Thank you again so much for joining us today. This has been the Groundbreaking Podcast. This is Heather Tunstall, co-chair of the Global Ag Tech Initiative, and we will catch you next month's episode. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Groundbreaking Podcast from the Global Ag Tech Initiative. You can subscribe to our podcast at globalagtechinitiative.com by clicking on the podcast tab in the menu, or by subscribing to our channel on iTunes or wherever you find your podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe to the Global Ag Tech Initiative's weekly e-newsletter, The Signal, for all things ag tech. Visit globalagtechinitiative.com and click on the Signal subscribe button on the right-hand side of the home page. Of course, you can also find us on LinkedIn. Just search for Global Ag Tech Initiative. To get even more in tune with the global ag tech space and be active in its advancement, consider joining the Global Ag Tech Alliance. More information on how to join the Alliance is available on globalagtechinitiative.com. The Global Ag Tech Initiative and the Groundbreaking Podcast are produced by Meister Media Worldwide. I'm Heather Tunstall, co-chair for the Global Ag Tech Initiative. Thank you for joining us today.